Last week we successfully restored this massive IBM tower. This PS2 Model 80 Type 3 is now nice and shiny and fully working. It is, however, quite useless as it is. So today we're going to install some hardware to make it into a great DOS adventure gamer. Okay, so this is how the machine came. There are no cards installed and it doesn't have a hard drive. So I think that's a good start. The motherboard doesn't have a hard drive controller, so we're going to install one of these. This is an IBM PS2 SCSI controller, also called Tribble. I think these machines were shipped with one of these cards originally, so this should be the perfect match. But we can't just plug that card into a slot and use it. First we need to install the drivers on the reference diskette for this machine. You can easily find an image file at Ardent and make a copy. Drivers for PS2 cards come in the form of ADF files. You usually need one or two of these files. They are also easily found at Ardent. I downloaded the two files needed for Tribble and made a copy on a diskette. And the next step is to boot the machine from the reference diskette. This is sort of like the BIOS on IBM PS2 systems. To install the card, we need to choose this option here. Copy an option diskette. The system will then ask you for the diskette with the drivers. So I'll just swap that diskette and press enter. This only takes a couple of seconds. And we are now prompted for the reference diskette again. And we now have a copy of the drivers on the reference disk too. Now that we have a copy of the drivers on the reference disk, we can go ahead and install the card. PS2 systems don't have a screw here to hold the card down. Instead, they have thumb screws at the back. With the card installed, we can now boot from the reference disk again and install the card. It's sort of like plug and play, way before plug and play was a thing. And now we're getting an error 165. This is normal. It's just telling us that it has found new hardware. And in the next step, the system is asking us if we want to install the card. So I'm just gonna hit yes. And automatic configuration is being run. Okay, and unfortunately we got an error. Okay, so something is wrong here, unfortunately. Configuring SCSI devices, please wait. Okay, and we are prompted to boot. Okay, let's see what happened here. Okay, it didn't install the card. Okay, that sucks. Well, I've got two of these cards. So I tried to install my other card, but unfortunately I got the same result. So then I decided to upgrade the firmware and flash the new EEPROM. And since I had the card on the bench, I decided to replace all three tantalums on the card. I haven't had any issues with tantalums in PS2 systems yet, but we know pretty much for sure that they are going to go bad within a few years in old PS2 systems. Now let's try to install this card again and see what happens. Fingers crossed. Okay, we've got a 165, so the card is definitely not installed. So let's try to install it. No, that didn't help, unfortunately. Now this kind of sucks. Well, next I decided to do a bunch of reading and testing. Both of my cards are untested, so I installed them in my Model 56. They would install and the system recognized the hard drive. So these cards are most likely okay. So next I installed a whole bunch of random cards in this motherboard. And they all worked fine. So the motherboard seems to be okay, and both cards seems to be okay too. But for whatever reason, the system just refuses to install them. I also checked the BIOS, and this is the latest version for these boards. So that's not our issue either. So unfortunately, I'm gonna have to put these cards aside for now, because I don't really have anything else to try at the moment. But I definitely want one of these cards in this machine. And I'll keep trying until we have solved the issue. Okay, plan B is to borrow this card here from the Model 50. This is a future domain, MCS350. It's a lesser card, but it will have to do for now. If you ever find one of these cards, an important thing to know is that they use ID 0 on the main hard drive, and not ID 6 like IBM branded cards. So let's install this card instead. I went ahead and placed a copy of the ADF files on the reference disk, just like we did with the other cards. And the system recognizes the card. But this card installed successfully, so definitely nothing wrong with that motherboard. I guess both Tribble cards could be broken, because I wasn't able to access the hard drive in the Model 56. But that could also be a conflict issue, since the Model 56 has an onboard SCSI controller. So not a perfect test of the Tribble cards. Okay, after reboots, we can now go to Set Configuration and View Configuration. Down here in slot 7, we now have the future domain SCSI adapter. For whatever reason, it seems to need a wait state for the Model 80. We may try to turn that off later, but for now I'm just going to leave it like this. Okay, next issue is the hard drive. The only hard drive I have that fits in this machine is this huge 5¼ inch half-height 40 meg drive. But unfortunately for what I'm planning to do, 40 meg it just isn't enough. So instead I'm going to try one of these cheap 3½ inch to 5¼ inch front bay mounting brackets from Amazon. This was intended for another project. I can always order another one. This is intended to install a diskette drive in a 5¼ inch drive bay. If I'm not mistaken, we should be able to use this bracket for a regular hard drive. Yes, I think this is going to work. The screw holes line up perfectly inside here. So let's give this a try. To make this work, we also need to move the two drive rails to the other drive. Screws were kindly provided with the brackets. And here's the final contraption. So we should be able to just slide it into this massive hard drive cradle. And these two large thumb screws are pushing two brackets down on the rails to lock the hard drive in position. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good solution. This is, by the way, a 250 meg drive. That should be perfect for a bunch of DOS games. Apparently my camera doesn't sync too well with the refresh rate of this machine. So let's go with a flat panel for now. Oh, that is a pretty noisy drive. I need to find something better for this machine. That drive is too noisy. So back in the settings, let's go down to Set Configuration and go down to Set and View SCSI Device Configuration. There are no SCSI adapters installed. So apparently this option here is not available for the future domain cards. It's probably only designed for original IBM cards. But that's okay, we don't really need to go in here. Okay, let's boot to DOS. Wow, that is a noisy drive. I'll cover it with something so it doesn't mess up the audio completely. Okay, so let's jump into F-disk and delete the old partition and create a new fresh partition. So let's format the drive. Okay, this is totally working. Awesome. For this build, I'm gonna go with DOS 622. This machine has a 386DX25 and some cache on the motherboard, so I actually think it's fast enough to run Windows. Let's find out. Okay, no mouse in Windows. Let's fix that first. Down here we have IBM PS2. So let's just save it. Insert Microsoft Windows Disk 2. Now let's try again. Okay, now we have a working mouse. Yeah, this is totally working. It's actually not even slow. Yeah, this runs really smooth. In that case, our next upgrade is the graphics card. For this build, I got myself an XGA-2 card. This should improve the graphics quite significantly. Not all MCA slots are the same, so we're gonna install this card in slot 4. I prepared the reference disk with the drivers for this card too, and it has been recognized by the system, so let's hit yes. Configuration is being run. We've got an error, and this is the same error that we got with Tribble. Something is messed up with this machine. Or do I have 3 bad cards? That is not very likely. Okay, next I decided to test the card in Model 56. And this card works, so there's nothing wrong with this card. There's something else going on here. So then I asked Major Tom at Ardent, and he recommended I should upgrade my reference disk. I have the latest version of the disk for this machine, but apparently there's also a patch called XGA-OPT. It's an exe file, so let's try to run it in Windows. Okay, it's a self-extracting file from 1991. We are prompted to install a diskette in drive B. This laptop obviously only has 1 drive. Let's try anyways. Okay, no worries. It's extracting to drive A. Okay, it's done. And here's our new diskette. Let's use it to boot the system. It's loading files to a virtual disk. We are of course going for the Model 80. But this looks like it could be useful for owners of other machines too. Target drive should be A, I suppose. So I'm going to insert the reference disk in drive A. Requires reference diskette version 1.10 or greater. Yeah, that's okay. We've got the latest version. Okay, we seem to be done here. So let's install that graphics card again. And boot the machine from the reference disk. Card is recognized, so I'm gonna hit yes. Yes! Configuration complete! So this totally fixed that error. Awesome! So big thanks to Tom if you're watching this. That seems to have been the problem with this machine. So if you ever find one of these machines, don't forget to update your reference disk with this patch. Now let's go to Set Configuration and View Configuration. And here's our card. XGA-2 display adapter A with 1 meg of VRAM. Awesome! This is probably just a few minutes worth of video, but it took me days to get here. By the way, I have moved the cable to the XGA-2 card. I'm gonna go with XGA-64480 256 colors for now, because I don't know what max resolution this card can do yet. I'm gonna have to do my reading later. Well, I don't know if that patch does something else aside from what we have seen so far. So let's install Tribble and boot the machine and see what happens. Okay, card is recognized. Let's hit yes and see what it does. The error went away. So that patch fixed this issue too. That is awesome. So that hard to find stupid card wasn't broken after all. Well, I guess I should attach a hard drive. We'll do another test. I just borrowed a random hard drive from another machine, because the ID is set to 6 on this drive. That way we don't need to mess around with jumpers quite yet. Well, it's a lot less noisy drive, but unfortunately this drive is too small for this project too. Okay, we've got a 162 error. I don't remember what a 162 is. No, let's choose no here and set configuration. And check our SCSI drive. SCSI drives are being configured, please wait. And here's our drive. So why did we get an error? Let's boot and see what happens. Okay, now the error disappeared, but I didn't actually do anything. So I guess we're okay. We better check if we have access to that hard drive. The camera was off, but it worked. It went straight into DOS. And our luck continues, I think. I found a much nicer drive. This is a 9 gig IBM branded SCSI drive. That sounds much nicer than the noisy Quantum drive. It's recognized by the system, but the ID is set to 0, so I don't think this is going to work. I need to mess around with the jumpers. The jumpers are a bit weirdly labeled here, so I'm not sure if this is correct. But I set the jumpers for 2 and 4, and this should give us ID 6. No, that didn't quite work. So we are 1 bit off, because ID is now set to 3. And if I'm not mistaken, we now have 2 and 1 sets instead of 4 and 2. So let me try that again. Okay, that went really well. The ID changed to 6, and all errors went away. FDisk is also recognizing the drive, and I was able to make a 1 gig partition. I can probably make 4 of these, but I can't possibly see how I could use that much storage. So I'm just gonna leave it at 1 gig. I'll format the drive and install DOS before we continue. I have actually also managed to find a 387 for this machine. So let's go ahead and install it before we continue. Although I haven't actually checked if any of the games I plan to play on this machine can actually use a 387. But let's install it anyways. I decided to route that extremely long SCSI cable underneath the drive cage, and then let it come up from underneath the drive and continue to where we're going to install the CD-ROM drive later. The next card to go in is TubeTime's AdLib replica card. We have built this card in a separate video, so if you want to watch the build, I'll put a link at the end of this video. We'll install this card in slot 7. These cards are pretty much impossible to find, so I'm really glad that TubeTime made a clone. That's some pretty impressive reverse engineering. Card is recognized by the system, and I have placed a copy of the drivers on the reference disk. And here's our AdLib card. So everything seems okay. By the way, if you manage to find one of the original cards, they actually don't work in a Model 80. So if you want AdLib in your Model 80, this is actually your only choice. The next card to go in is a RAM expansion card. There wasn't much useful information on this card to identify it, so I sent an email to David at the IBM Museum YouTube channel, and of course he immediately recognized it as an Ecologic SimplyRAM 32. I have spent hours troubleshooting this card, but I decided to skip it in this video because we have done enough card swapping and troubleshooting already. But this card has a very strange bug. If I install any other card after I have installed this card, I get a black screen on this machine. And also, if this card is installed and I decide to remove any of the other cards, I get a black screen too. So for some weird reason, this has to be the last card to go in. Very strange bug indeed, but as long as I don't remove or install any of the other cards, this card works perfectly. Luckily it came with 2 RAM sticks already, because I have tried many different RAM sticks in this card, and these are the only 2 sticks that work. So until I figure out what's so special about these sticks, this is all we can use. These are 4 meg sticks, by the way. I'm gonna install this card in slot 1. We can of course add more cards, but it requires us to uninstall this card first and then put it back in afterwards. Now let's put some blanks in. We are going to install 1 more card in this machine later. Card is recognized and installed without any issues. So if we boot the system now, it goes beyond 8 megs. The system is now counting up 16 megs of RAM. That is a sweet amount of RAM for this machine. I'd love to add some more, but this is not bad for a 386. And here's our Ecologic SimplyRAM 32. with 8 megs of RAM. This is already a pretty nice machine, but we've got more to do. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of the trouble with this card here. I did some more tests, and it wasn't the card swapping that caused the black screen. It was the cold boots I did between the card swaps. So this card works perfectly, but only until I make a cold boot. Then this card gives me a black screen every time. So that kind of sucks. Unfortunately, I don't know if I have any other working machines with this type of MCA slot, so I can't do any more tests at the moment. So I'm gonna have to put this card aside for now. I'll find another machine to test with, and hopefully some RAM sticks, and I'll get back to this card in a future video. And now to the next upgrade. To be a proper DOS gaming machine, we obviously need a CD-ROM drive. So here's our next upgrade. This is an early style drive with a caddy. The CD-ROM is installed in one of these caddies and then pushed into the CD-ROM. But we can't just install it and run it. Let me show you why. This drive is partially disassembled already. And this is what we need to take care of before we install this drive. Check out those weird caps. By the looks of it, these are electrolytic caps installed in these plastic housings and then soldered to the PCB, sort of like SMD caps. Aside from these four 47 micro 16 volt caps, we also have some smaller caps over here. I posted a picture of these on Twitter, and apparently these are not great. Eventually they start to leak and damage the board. So let's just quickly replace these caps before we install this drive. Okay, this may turn into a big mess of molten plastics, but let's try with the rework station first and see how this goes. So two of these smaller caps are 10 microfarad 16 volts. Let's start with these. Oh, that came off quite easily actually, without too big of a mess. And they are indeed SMD caps, just very, very strange ones. They have two small and one large pad underneath. And those two red dots are glue. I just realized I should have ordered regular SMD caps to replace these. Let's see, maybe I have some in my stash. Okay, the other cap came off just as easily. Next up we have a 22 microfarad 6 volt cap here. Yeah, these are really easy to remove. Let's clean this mess up. We've got some solder balls. Watch out for these. They can short something on your PCB. Okay, easy to remove and easy to clean up. Now let's see if that large pad is connected to one of these smaller pads here. And it isn't. So this pad here is actually not ground, as one would think. I actually have ground here, so let's double check. No, this pad here is not connected to ground. And it's not connected to any of these two pads either. So this large pad here must be for holding the caps down on the PCB, but not to connect the cap to the board. Well, that means if these caps are small enough, we can use them to replace the original caps. Well, the width doesn't matter much. They are slightly higher than the original cap. So I better check the clearance. Okay, clearance is okay. At least for these two caps here. So let's give this a try. The advice I got on Twitter was to replace these with through-hole caps laying flat. But I think this is going to look pretty neat too. We're in luck. I found some 22 microfarad 6.3 volt caps intended for the IBM value points, but it seems I ordered a few extra. These pads are actually slightly larger than these two caps have, so this cap should be even easier to install. Okay, soldered and cleaned. I can't see any reason why this shouldn't work. Okay, so these guys look like they might be a bit more tricky to get off the board, since they have two small pads on this side here, and one large pad on this side. By the way, if you know the name of this weird form factor, then please let us all know. Okay, that was actually just as easy to remove as the smaller caps. The Rework station did a great job to desolder this large inaccessible pad and the two smaller pads on the side here. Polarity seems to be marked with this black dot here. By the way, when I desolder SMD components like this, I don't lift them up, I push them sideways. That lowers the risk of damaging the pads. The housing seems to be some sort of plastic that doesn't melt easily. There is a lot of solder left on those pads. I'll clean it up with some flux. The 47 micro 16 volt caps I found in my stash are about the same height as these. So we don't even need any extra clearance to replace these. But unfortunately the pads are too narrow. The solder might find its way in under the cap and connect to these pads. But I'm not sure I'm willing to risk it. Let's instead use through-hole caps to replace these four. I'll bend the legs to one side and then back again. This way they are sort of similar to the original caps and should be easy to install. I'll use a splash of flux and place a blob of solder on top of each leg. Well, that doesn't look too bad. I kind of like this solution too. I guess we could glue them down with some hot glue. But they are small enough, so I don't think it's necessary. I'm gonna skip it. This is, by the way, a CDU926S. I found it in the ugliest possible external case. The case was so ugly, I'm not even going to show it to you. It is manufactured in 1998, so it's not the perfect match for this machine. If I find something more period correct, I will replace it. But for now I think this is the best option I have. I forgot to check the ID, but let's go ahead and test it anyways. And of course, the cable has to be upside down. That's so annoying. But we'll figure something out with this mess. I'm gonna use a regular extension cable for power. Okay, let's turn the machine on with the reference disk in the drive. And unfortunately we're back at 8 megs. And we're getting a 162 error. I think that's a SCSI drive error. Configuration error. Let's try to automatically configure the system. Configuration program is complete. Please restart. Okay, no errors on the next boot. Let's go to set configuration and go down to set and view SCSI devices. And here's our drive. SCSI device type, ROM device, ID 0. I added 2 regular drive rails to the CD-ROM drive. So now we can install it and lock it with these 2 large thumb screws. I don't have the original bezel that was supplied by IBM, and I'm still saving up for a 3D printer. So for now we're going to have these 2 large gaping holes. Or perhaps I have a decent fix as a temporary solution. I'll order some stuff and we'll try it out. Well, we're not done yet. I just received this huge box from Mouser to finish this project. Everything is so big with this project. Even the bloody box from Mouser doesn't even fit on camera. Unfortunately, I had to do some traveling this week, so this mystery box is gonna have to be for a separate video. If you're watching this next week, there will be a link to that video on the screen shortly. If you're watching this fresh, hit the bell icon below and set it to all. And now's a good time to watch the video where we built the Adlib replica card. I will end by saying thank you to my patrons. I appreciate your support. If you want to support me too, consider becoming a patron. Patrons get ad-free early access. If you like this video, let me know with a thumbs up in the comments. If you're a regular viewer, consider subscribing to this channel. Thank you for watching, I'll see you next week.